Well, hi, everyone, and welcome again to the Musical Inner Tube. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane. You know, Don's had quite a career in radio and television, where he's been an on-air personality, a news anchor, and even a TV weatherman.
And John has been a college professor. He's written several books, and he's been an editor and features writer at the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper.
We first teamed up for a radio show in college. On one show, we introduced a soothing musical interlude.
But we stumbled, and it came out Musical Inner Tube.
And that became the name for this podcast, where we talk with interesting people about their interesting lives, difference makers who've really made a difference.
One of the things that we learned during especially the early days of the pandemic last year was how much fun it is to work from home. And one of the complaints that I heard constantly from people, and I experienced it a little bit myself, was after you're home 3 or 4 days and you don't have to get dressed and go out anywhere, you start losing track of time. Geez, what day is it? And that is what our next guest is all tied up with. His name is David Henkin. He is a professor in the Department of History at UC Berkeley, and his primary field of research is U.S. history. And what he has been researching lately comes out in his new book called The Week, A History of the Unnatural Rhythms That Made Us Who We Are. Hi, David. How are you?
Hi, Don. Nice to talk to you.
Good to meet you, David.
Nice to meet you, John.
David, talk to us about the week. It seems, as you said in the book, in the title of the book, unnatural. Most of the other timekeeping that we have, months and days and years, have to do with the sun or the moon or something like that. But the week seems to stand out as just 7 arbitrary days that were picked out of nowhere.
I think the best evidence suggests that the 7-day cycle does originate in 2 places, and you can think of them both as religious. The most important one actually is the Jewish and then Christian, then Muslim Sabbath practice, which requires tracking 7-day cycles. The other would be the Roman planetary week, which wasn't a cycle of anything practical. It didn't organize people's labor schedules or didn't organize civic life, but it did at least assign a cycle of 7 days to the 7 observable celestial bodies, so the sun and the moon and the 5 planets, which is actually where we get the names for our weekdays from in most Indo-European languages, and in English too. So that's the origin of it, and it spread across the world, mostly with Christianity and then Islam, and then with European empires. But many parts of the world never had a 7-day week, really until the late 19th and even into the 20th century. So it's a artificial calendar, and as many calendars are, but the week doesn't seem to have a particular grounding in the natural world. And if we lost track of the week, if we suddenly got really bad at keeping records and couldn't remember whether it was Tuesday or Wednesday, there'd be nothing in the observable world to get us back on track.
What did people do without a week? Let's say before these weeks were established, or maybe in parts of the world where they did not have a week. Obviously, people do business all the time, and one thinks of calendars as arising from business and government and the need to keep track of things. But I'm just wondering if you could talk about other ways of structuring human time and human relationships.
Well, one thing I'd say is that even in societies that did have the week, lots of people, especially rural people, worked all the time anyway, did not have, and if you worked on a farm, you typically did not take 1 in 7 days off just because the Bible told you to, or just because a government mandated a 7th day of rest. So lots of societies have not had a regular day of rest for workers. And then some societies have had cycles of rest, but were not continuous or were not 7 days long. So one question is, how did human beings rest when they didn't have a built-in weekend?
Right.
And the answer sort of is, well, in many places they didn't, and in other places they did so irregularly or according to cycles that were attached to lunar months, not to a 7-day week. And I would say that in the United States, before the early 19th century, people did track the week, and they did typically have a day off. Even enslaved people in the United States, more often than not, had a day off of work on Sunday. But they weren't as attached to the week as we are in the modern world, because their Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays weren't all that different from one another. So one question is, how has the week as a cycle of work and rest strengthened and spread and tightened its grip on us? And the other is, how has the week as a series of just 7 different days tightened its grip on us? And I think so some of the complaints we had during the pandemic about losing our place in time reflected that as much as the cycle of work and rest, because most of us didn't really change our weekly work schedules, but we did, in some conspicuous ways, change our other kinds of week schedules. So then, when we were shut down, we began complaining about the week, whereas we could have been complaining about the time of day or the time of month or the time of year, which in many ways were much more obviously unsettled by the pandemic.
Historically, when did we first start keeping track of the week as 7 separate days? You were talking about the early 18th century. Is that when it happened, or was it later than that?
In 1800, most people living in the United States had very few reasons to care whether it was Tuesday or Wednesday, other than how close or far you were to the weekend. By 1850, I'd say the masses of ordinary people had already become what we are, which is sort of people who live by the week, really specifically. And if you think today is Tuesday and it turns out to be Wednesday, it's really inconvenient, in a way that if you think today is the 6th and it turns out to be the 7th, it usually isn't. And not only is it inconvenient, but it makes you feel like, whoa. It's like a symptom of temporal disorientation, or even a symptom of some kind of cognitive decline. So to be that kind of person, to be a kind of person for whom the week feels so real that the difference between Tuesday and Wednesday is so powerful, I think that experience did not become common until the middle of the 19th century, so until the 1830s, 40s, 50s.
Yeah, sort of like, I lost a day, my gosh.
Exactly. And if you lose it, it's gone, and suddenly you're in a place you don't know for a few minutes.
Yeah, and one sort of parallel to that is, in the 19th century, people began much more often writing about the experience of traveling across the international date line. And this is something you'll still see now. If you cross the international date line and you gain or lose a day, unless it happens to be your birthday, you're unlikely to express that mystery as like, oh my God, it was the 8th and then it was the 10th. You'll say what people began saying in the 19th century is, oh my God, one day it was Monday and suddenly it's Tuesday, or suddenly it's Monday again, or suddenly it's Wednesday even. So right, when we feel like we've lost or gained a day, we typically express that within the weekly cycle rather than in terms of any other calendar.
It seems to me like the week came about when we were all, and by all I mean America, was trying to structure time. I mean, with the time zones and things like that. Is that about right?
Well, it's an interesting thing, because I would say that the week took hold slightly before the creation of what we call mean time zones, right? Rather than using the actual position of the sun, you say for a certain distance of several hundred miles, everyone in this zone will synchronize their clocks. And that sort of began privately and with the railroads in the middle of the 19th century, but didn't really gain widespread recognition until the 1880s, and didn't officially become part of a global timekeeping system until the period of World War I. So I would say that the week takes the kind of route that I'm talking about without any real government intervention, without any intervention of large corporations in the first part of the century. And then other stuff happens later. And when that other stuff happens, that other stuff is very important. It includes not only global time zones, it includes international agreement on where the international date line is, it includes the introduction of daylight saving time. When that was happening, those same reformers and those same governments were trying to do something with the week. They were trying to reform it. They were trying to create a new calendar in which the week fit in a consistent way. So it's inconvenient for accounting purposes that every month and every year has an irregular number of weeks and an irregular number of of weekdays. So the same reformers who brought us all those other kinds of rational timekeeping standardizations wanted to create a calendar in which, say, December 6th would be a Monday every year. So you wouldn't have to worry about that, and in which months would have a regular number of weeks, and years would have a regular number of weeks. And the way they thought to do that was by introducing a couple of leap days at the end of the year that would have no place in the weekly cycle. So you'd have, for example, a 364-day year where every day was part of a weekly cycle, and then 1 or 2 days, depending on whether it was a leap year, at the end of the year, there'd be blank days, or what they called extra hebdomadal days, days that stand outside of the week. So you could go, for example, from Saturday, December 31st, to blank day, holiday, you can call it whatever you want, and then Sunday, January 1st would come a day or two later. And this was the completely rational proposal that was supported by big business in the United States. It was supported by many governments and many reformers, but ultimately it failed. So I would say that was actually in some ways a more comparable change to the calendar and more comparable to the things that you were talking about time zones and things of that sort. But interestingly, that one was defeated and never went through. So we still have what we have today, which is the week is a really inconvenient time unit because it's not an even fraction of any larger time unit. There's no time unit you can say that about. Every other time unit, there's some other time unit that we use, which is built up of it, but not the week.
So, what's interesting about the week, we're getting into some very interesting directions here, but one of the things that I keep thinking about with the week is that it's made up of 7 days, the week that we're talking about.
Right.
And each day, in English at least, has a name that goes back to various beliefs. There's Sunday, that doesn't have to be explained. Neither does Monday if you think of moon, right? But then there are other days that are dedicated to Woden and Thor.
Right, but Woden and Thor are really the planets Mercury and Jupiter, right?
Absolutely. And so in other languages, that's what you get, right? You get mercredi, right? In French and things like this. But they do, there's a whole pack of popular, I guess we could call superstition, which thinks of each day as having its own personality, right? And just as stars were once thought to do, often the days are thought to control what can happen, or they have a personality that includes the way that they feel. So, for example, you have Blue Monday and so forth, or you have the foods that are associated with the day that you eat. For example, Tuesday is soup, Wednesday is roast beef, and so forth. Or you have the notion that the day controls, if you're born on a certain day of the week, it controls the kind of person that you will be. So that the Monday is fair face, I guess, is the one I'm thinking about.
Were you born on a Monday, John?
No.
Also, John, Tuesday isn't soup. Tuesday is
Tacos,
Taco Tuesday. Get it right.
I was thinking, in New Jersey, they don't do Taco Tuesday, huh?
No, it's not. In fact, I think they might do pork roll, as a matter of fact.
We go.
Or Taylor ham, actually, to stay with the initial T. Yeah. But I'm wondering about those superstitions, too. And do they come before the week, or do they come with it, or how do they grow up? Because it's really interesting. I mean, we even in the modern era, we have cooked up, hump day for Wednesday, right? Thank God it's Friday, and so forth and so on. We have sort of a popular way of thinking about the work week, and I'm wondering just where all that comes from.
Yeah, so I think all those things are related, but I like to distinguish them. I would distinguish the things that you're talking about, John, in a couple of categories. One is, I think, a very old, you might call it an astrological conception of the week, which says that somehow the weekly cycle is a series of lucky and unlucky days, and it's unlucky and lucky for the same reason that we think astrologically more generally, that the stars are somehow governors, or at least signs of our fate. And to me that makes sense that would be a part of the weekly cycle, given the fact that one of the real origins of the 7-day week is the Roman planetary cycle. So the week is an astrological unit of timekeeping within that Roman tradition, and that Roman tradition sort of built itself through Christianity into not only the names that many languages use for the week, but also the attitudes that we have. So so I would put into that category all the ideas about Monday as child and Tuesday as child, but also in the 19th century, which is the time period that I studied most closely, all kinds of people,
Yes.
both European descended and African descended Americans, had a variety of beliefs about lucky and unlucky times to do everything. If you see a woman first on a Monday, you're going to have a bad week. If this happens on a Friday, you're going to have a bad rainy season. You shouldn't cut your nails on this day of the week. All sorts of things like that. So I would lump those together under the astrological week, and I would say that they have that they sort of weakened in power, and right now it's mostly preserved for us in the form of those children's rhymes about what day of the week you were born, or good days and bad days to get married. The one possible exception I would say is the idea that Friday is a bad luck day was very widespread in the United States in the 1800s, and that was probably the last of those superstitions to die off. So that's one category.
I'm sorry, did that lead to the Friday the 13th being super unlucky?
Yeah, it did. And the Friday the 13th is sort of a combination of the unlucky number and the unlucky day of the week. So Friday the 13th is sort of like the perfect storm of bad luck. But in the 19th century, all Fridays were considered bad, and they didn't actually single out the 13th. It wasn't until the 20th century that Friday the 13th began to have its sort of status that we know it has from horror film cultures of the last 50 years. Okay, so that's one category. It's just of what John was talking about, the ideas about days being auspicious or ominous. Number two would be attitude toward days of the week that are sort of based on our schedules, right? So that would include things like Taco Tuesdays or any association that you have with must see TV on Thursdays, things like that. So that recognizes that the schedules that we make produce associations.
Yeah, and that's interesting because Sunday night in our family was the night to watch Bonanza and Walt Disney when I was growing up, and then toward the late 90s it became Sopranos night.
Oh, well, in between those two, it was always Mary Tyler Moore and Bob Newhart show back.
Yes.
In the day. So I think that's the most modern category of weekly association, the one that really recognizes that it's about the schedules that we create. The third, which is probably the one we think of most often, is the one that's based on the work week. The idea of a blue Monday, or Sunday night being depressing, or Wednesday being hump day. All of those are about the place of a day of the week within a weekday weekend cycle. So to me, those three things are really, really different, but they all contribute to our sense of what the character of each weekday is. The first one least of all these days, and I think the second one, surprisingly, most of all, but the one we talk about most is number three, the place of the day in the work week cycle, because that's the one that we all share. Whereas the other ones are much more individual. I mean, for one of us, Thursday night might have been the big television night, and then in the 90s, and someone else it might have been Wednesday. Maybe I don't like tacos, or maybe in New Jersey they don't have tacos. So we don't talk about that one as much. But I think on an individual level, the associations that we have with our own entertainment schedules, back when we used to do that, with the custody arrangements of our divorced parents, with early release from school, those things really do leave an imprint on us and shape our sense of which days we like, which days we don't like, and what the actual character, even how we imagine the appearance of a day is partly based on that.
More with David Henkin in a moment, but first, this soothing musical inner tube.
David's book, The Week, A History of the Unnatural Rhythms That Made Us Who We Are, is available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. There's also an audio version available on Audible.
Besides the week, David Henkin has written several books about how America has communicated and connected through history.
There's City Reading, written words in public spaces in antebellum New York.
And The Postal Age, the emergence of modern communications in 19th century America.
And a book he co-wrote with Rebecca McLennan, Becoming America, A History for the 21st Century.
And now, back to David, Don, and John talking about the week on the musical Inner Tube.
Now, I know that the week is very closely tied to business and to work. Did the week dictate work, or did the opposite happen? Work shaped up the week to be what it is today.
I think that's a really tough question, because I think that the cycle of 6 days you shall work and 1 day you shall rest is really, really old. And the world of labor has undergone so many different transformations during that time that you could make the argument that the week creates our experience of work. But there's a lot of both. I would say that in the 19th century, in the Industrial Revolution, hardened the boundaries between the weekdays and the weekend day, or the weekend days, depending which it was. In other words, before industrialization, the idea that certain time belonged to the employer and certain time belonged to the employee hadn't fully set in. That happens in different places at different times. In the United States, I would say that really happened around the second quarter of the 19th century, like in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s, first in cities, and then spread across the economy over the next 50 years. So that's a way in which work changes the week. I mean, managers begin to use the week as a technology to control the production process. But even within that, things change. For example, it makes a big difference whether you get paid by the week or paid by the month or paid by the day. And those are managerial decisions that are not dictated by the structure of the week. I mean, we could live in a society that had fortnightly pay, as some societies do, and even some of our jobs do, or semi-monthly pay, or annual pay. But the fact that in the 19th century, people began getting paid cash wages in large numbers for the first time, and they mostly were paid by the week, made a huge difference. So employers and industries do things with the week that shape all of our experiences of the week. So I wouldn't sort of pin that on the week. I guess I would pin that on work, or on industry or capitalism or something like that.
Well, you could see how week gives people who own large industries, especially, a modular unit around which they can organize their activities, right?
Exactly.
And they can organize payment, which we've been talking about primarily, about when people are paid and what the day is when the payment will happen, and you can arrange that with your bank and so forth and so on. So it does. It didn't have to be 7 days. It could have been 5. It could have been 9.
Right.
But the point
is, it didn't have to be 7. Yeah. It is convenient in some ways, but I want to point out all the ways in which it's really inconvenient, and which is why people challenged it. So one example, which I think is clearest in the case of the Soviet Union, the Bolsheviks tried to get rid of the week in part because they wanted continuous production, which is much more closer to what we have now in 21st century capitalist societies. So they didn't want people to have first they'd made a 5-day week instead of a 7-day week, and then they moved it to 6, but they staggered it so different people had different days off. So the week as a coordinated time unit was really inconvenient for continuous production. And then in the United States, as I alluded to before, people like George Eastman of the Kodak Corporation were crusaded against the week because it was really inconvenient to have all these accounting procedures that were based on the month or the year, and then have this other unit that people actually worked by. Whereas it would be much better to have a small cycle that actually was a subset of the month and the year rather than what we had. So yes, it is good for organizing to have a short cycle. As you point out, it doesn't have to be 7, but beyond that, it's not always good for it to be coordinated, and it's not always good for it to be sort of mathematically anomalous. but it
Right.
is, and that's what we have.
I think my experience of class in America, and this does relate to the reality that there's still a lot of people who get a check or some cash at the end of the week on Fridays.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of people who do. There is a big class division between them and people who are paid, directly into their bank account. You don't see it, you don't touch any paper, but there's a lot of people who live that way. And I recall being probably in the place that no one wants to be, in a Kmart late on on Christmas Eve, right?
Yeah.
And I was there, and the place was packed, and many, many people in that place at that moment buying the last things that were left on the shelves. Many, many, many of them had their pay in the little. It actually chokes me up to think about it, because it is almost. It's something that a lot of people have never seen, but the little paper pockets that pay is given to,
Yeah.
and they had them in their hands or in their pockets bulging out, and it suddenly, the fact of class was, and the fact that this is how those folks lived, and this was their one moment to shop.
No, I think that's a really interesting
for Christmas
point.
presents.
And
Yeah.
one thing I would observe is that we often think that getting paid in cash is a feature of not only of the informal economy, but often of lower paying sectors of the mainstream economy. I would say getting paid by the week has become that too. Obviously, getting paid by the day, maybe even more so. Getting paid by the week was much more common in the 19th century than it is in the 21st. Now it really does feel like it happens, and people do get paid a certain day of the week in cash, but it's usually not the same day, and it is much more confined to the more exploited sectors of the workforce.
In your research, David, when you were looking up the history of the week, what was the one thing that surprised you most?
Well, there are a couple things I was sort of looking for and disappointed not to find. One of them was food. I kind of expected that the Taco Tuesday business would have been a very prominent part of most people's experience of the week, and I decided after spending a lot of time on it that it just really wasn't. There were certain parts of the population that did eat on weekly schedules or did cook on certain foods on weekly schedules, but most did not. And that if anything, it was probably more common in the 1700s than it was in the 1800s. So that's one thing. I also was sort of expecting that more women in their diaries would think about the relationship between their menstrual cycles and days of the week, and I quickly found that wasn't true really either. So the things that I did find that were most interesting, at a certain point they stopped surprising me, but they really struck me, were how much the week was associated with memory. People would typically remember events accurately by the day of the week and not by the date of the month, and that they would sort of begin that way. They'll be called to testify in court, and they'll say, well, let's see, I don't know what date it was, but it was definitely a Wednesday, because I remember I didn't do my laundry that Monday. I postponed it for a couple of days. Now you don't usually do that. Or I remember it was Friday, because that's usually when I sweep the floor of the shop. So there's a whole lot of that. And then in people's diaries, there are a lot of times where people would get the date wrong and the day right, which again is not so surprising to us, because that's our experience. I mean, John, if we had an arrangement to meet on Monday, December 7th, and we looked at our calendars and saw that Monday wasn't December 7th, I think our first instinct would be that the other person meant Monday, December 6th, not Tuesday, December 7th, right?
Right. Right.
So again, that's I think something we mostly take for granted in the U.S. today. But I was a little surprised how early that set in. I sort of thought that maybe it would be a late 19th century thing, but already by the 20s and 30s and 40s, that's the norm. When people get a date like messed up in their diaries, it's the day that's right and the date that's wrong.
Wow. See, that goes back to the power of the day in some ways.
the power of the day and the greater likelihood that you'll know what day it is because it's the distinctiveness of the day. It also has something to do with diary keeping. I mean, using a pre-formatted printed diary was very uncommon in the 1700s. People used almanacs, and almanacs arranged the calendar by months. But then around the 1820s and 30s, they began buying these sort of small books. We still use them often that show 6 or 7 days in a spread, and they label each day and each date and give you a place to write stuff on them. And so people who were using those were very much thinking along the lines of weeks. And in that sense, it's something that we do a lot less of now with our electronic calendars. We don't actually use the week quite as exclusively as a way to remember our appointments. And we actually don't even have to use the week to schedule the appointments in the first place as much. Before we had electronic calendars, it'd be really inconvenient for me to have an ongoing relationship with you where I said, well, let's meet on the 7th and the 13th and the 16th and the 24th this month. But now we actually could, as long as our electronic calendars reassure each other that we're free at that time. Sure, why not? I mean, we probably wouldn't want to, and that's interesting to me. But we could. Whereas before the advent of electronic calendar, I think that would have been a mnemonically pointless scheduling exercise.
Yeah, I noticed too that one thing that people do a lot is to say, well, let's think about this in advance and work 2 weeks out, right?
Right.
That they'll use 2 weeks, especially I've noticed is pretty, let's think about, okay, if we want to get this done on X, let's think, what would 2 weeks from X be?
Yeah,
that's when
that's really funny.
have to start working on it.
I hadn't thought about that. I mean, because a lot of our ideas about how what constitutes frequency in an activity, whether it's how often we call our mothers, or how often we meet a friend, or how often we, do some form of exercise or shopping, has been structured by the week. So when we want to do something less frequently or less imminently than that, I guess maybe we say, okay, let's do 2 weeks out.
Right, the fortnight.
The fortnight.
Oh, by the way, I just want you to know, David, you made me look up the day that I was born on, and it was a Sunday, which I had never known before.
Right. So that makes you wise and happy and gay and all. I forget what the last line of that poem.
I could just hear Don shaking his head over there.
Yeah, the wise part, the happy and gay. I don't know. Well, maybe happy. John's a happy guy.
Okay,
I'll say that. And he is wise. He has a PhD in something. I'm not sure what it is.
Right, I forget myself.
But now we know he was destined to earn that PhD by his Sunday.
Exactly. He came out of the womb with a PhD. That's what happened.
That's right.
I'll tell you a funny story. Is that in Puritan New England, lots of people believe that the day you were born matched the day you were conceived, and so this minister, his wife presented him a child on a Sunday, and this was a big problem for him because he had been one of the Puritan ministers who loudly proclaimed that sexual intercourse was forbidden on the Sabbath. So he was forced either to disavow the child or to disavow the belief in the alignment of conception and birth by the week.
Or sit in the chair and get dumped in the lake.
Yeah. David, when you think of the week nowadays, you do think of sort of a loss. There are people working on Sundays,
right.
People shopping on Sundays.
Course, yeah.
A reverse of all those blue laws that a lot of us grew up with. What do you think of the future of the week? Is it something that is going to be dissolving as we start being a little more global and a little more active around the clock? The 24/7 idea.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this. I think that it's likely to weaken in some ways. I don't think it's dissolving. And here's how I've come to think about it. If the week is really just a cycle of work and rest, weekdays and then weekend, or profane days and sacred days, or shopping days and quiet days. If that's really all the week is, then it would really likely dissolve because of telecommuting, what we call 24/7 accessibility, and asynchronous entertainment, all of that, it would. But because the week does so many other things too, and for us, because it helps us organize our sense of our place and time, I don't think it's really going to be dissolved by those developments. And I think the pandemic shutdown offered a glimpse of that. I think that because the telecommuting wasn't new, and all these other 24/7 stuff wasn't new, but somehow the disruption of our routines made us want to sort of hold on to the week. And then when we couldn't, we complained about that. So I think as long as we are attached to the week as a device for scheduling activities with friends and strangers, I think it's likely to remain the primary calendar unit through which we remember stuff and organize our place and time. And I don't think the 24/7 commerce is going to totally destroy it, but I do think it makes a difference. And as I suggested before, I think electronic calendars, lots of other things are going to make a difference. The entertainment stuff is really interesting. You know, we were talking about must-see TV on various nights of the week. You know, there are now two generations of Americans who've grown up without that at all, who consume entertainment pretty much completely asynchronously, except in the significant case of sports. Spectator sports remain the form of the synchronous entertainment that really, I think, does bind people to the week, especially if they live in the part of the country where football, rather than one of the other major sports, dominates, because football is still a sport that has not loosened at all its attachment to the 7-day cycle. You know, Friday night high school football, and Saturday college, and Sunday professional, and then Monday night and Thursday night. Everything is really week bound.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, again, it's I guess with sport. And part of the attraction of watching sports on television is that it's authentic. That is to say, it actually takes place in real time. You're watching something live. And I think a lot of people, I know when time shifting first started, when people had VHS machines and stuff, people would stop their ears if they hadn't seen a game yet. So they get home and watch the taped game, but it was never the same. Right. Everyone always said, "Oh, it's not the same. The real thing is to see it on television." Yeah.
Sports, as you just said, it really is committed to being both unscripted, but also and live. But
yes.
But I just find that the football example is interesting because there's really no sport that's quite as attached to the week, and part of the reason is that the conventional wisdom is that you need. Ordinarily, you need about 7 days between games. So the week is not just a scheduling device. It's to coordinate activities. It's also somehow thought to be the natural interval between events, which is another thing that the week helps us do. It helps us sort of space out events. So somehow people think that you need the 7 days or 6 days to recover from concussion-inducing violence in football, and you don't in ice hockey. But anyway, yeah. So that's part of and so as long as football retains its power and prestige in American entertainment culture, I think there will still be forms of synchronized entertainment that anchor people's sense of place within the week.
I do remember when Thursday night football started, the few people that I know that were football fanatics were not happy with that because, we still had to get up for work on Friday. So I'd stay up until midnight watching a Thursday night game, and then I'd have to get up Friday and go to work. It was such an inconvenience.
Yeah, but those people didn't mind doing the same thing on Monday night football. I think the problem with Thursday night football was just that they were not used to it. Right, that their sense of what a Thursday night was did not include football, whereas their sense of a Monday night did. I don't think there's any reason why Thursday night football is any less convenient than Monday night. It probably is more because Friday tends to be a more relaxed day. But it was a huge, like a psychic shift for a generation of football fans.
Yes, very definitely. And I did check my day, my birthday. I was born on a Saturday, John.
Wow.
Yeah, we're both weekend kids.
Both weekend.
So, yay. Well, this was an interesting trip into an area that you don't really think about. But once you start thinking about it, it gets really deep really quickly. And it was interesting, all the stuff you've unearthed. And I, for one, am kind of amazed at how it all fell into place so rapidly. So thanks, David, for doing all that research and coming up with the book. And
just fascinating.
It's really lovely to talk to you both. Even though I'm not a weekend, I'm a Tuesday's child. So
Tuesday's child.
Yeah.
You've learned to tie your bootlace.
I have, but
see how they run.
There we go. All right, I'm nice to talk to Beatles fans as well. So
thanks so much, David.
All the best. Thank you for listening to the Musical Inner Tube.
You can get in touch with us by email. We're at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
You can follow us on Twitter at @MInnerTube, capitalize the M and I.
Our webpage is musicalinnertube, that's musical spelled with 2 A's, .libsyn, that's spelled LIBSYN.com.
The Inner Tube is available on Amazon Music, Facebook, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio Podcasts, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Like us, why don't you? And give us a good review on any of those platforms.
And as always, thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for our theme music.